Hi, welcome to StatStuff. I'm Matt Hansen. Have you ever been in a meeting where someone throws out an acronym or key term and you have no idea what it means? Then you try guessing what it means based on the context of the conversation. You hope you're not alone, but then it gets worse when you notice that people in the meeting start using that same word, but you still have no idea what they're talking about. When it seems like it's a critical issue, I find it easier to just stop and ask someone to define it for me, because chances are I'm not the only one who's feeling confused. But believe it or not, that happens all the time, and many folks aren't so willing to stop and ask for clarification. But I firmly believe that those kinds of communication breakdowns create a risk to the success of a project. Well, in this lesson, we'll review what operational definitions are and how they could be used to standardize our communication and improve the team's understanding of a project. Now, there are no prerequisites for this lesson, so let's begin by defining what operational definitions are. Well, operational definitions are merely just a list of the definitions for key terms or acronyms that are used in a particular business area where you're trying to work through a project. Now, the purpose of tracking these things are that they help to unify the discussion for the team when you're working through the project. It also helps prevent any confusion and reveal any potential assumptions that people might have about that particular business area or the processes that are involved. And also helps people who are new or unfamiliar with the process area to be quickly acclimated to those terms or acronyms that are being used. Now, how do you build a list of operational definitions? Well, try to listen for and write down any of those unique terms or codes or acronyms that are being used when you're sitting with the team. For example, if you're building a process map or trying to define the problem statement, you're getting yourself acclimated with it, with that area, if you haven't already been familiar with it. And as you hear people talk, listen for certain terms or codes or any acronyms that people use and write those things down. Even if it's things that you're familiar with, but there are some other ones that you're unfamiliar with, it's still good to write those things down, especially if they're addressing any key critical words that are essential in defining the process, or if there are key words used for defining particular measurements or metrics that are used within that area. Then notate the definitions for each of those different items and ask a key subject matter expert, or SME, that's on the team for what those definitions are for those terms. Once you've got those all compiled, then present that to the rest of the team as a list and ask for their approval to make sure that they agree with how you've defined each of those. And then as you encounter new terms, then feel free to update that list, so that way it's a fresh list where you've got the most current terms defined that are used within that project. Now, is it necessary that you build these operational definitions? Well, no. It doesn't have to be, especially if there aren't very many terms that are used or the scale of the project is relatively small. But it is very helpful if you are new to that business area that's sponsoring the project, especially in some organizations where they have black belts who are dropped into a separate department to help support a particular project in that area. Usually that black belt is unfamiliar with some of the terms or metrics or acronyms or whatever is used in that area. So in that case, it's very essential to do that. It could also be extremely helpful because very often I've seen where actual people on the team have different understandings of the same terms, or they might assume certain things about the terms. They might assume different things about certain terms they use to define measurements and metrics and how those are calculated. So sometimes this could be a great way to standardize the definition for these terms as people communicate. So once you have these things, how are you going to communicate these operational definitions that you've defined? Well, they can be included as an appendix, like to a project storyboard. Just throw them in the back where you might identify the key terms or acronyms that are used, and you might compile a whole separate list of those if you have a whole lot of them. They can also be tracked in a separate file, so that way, as needed, if you need to review them with the team to make sure that you've got the right list, especially as you find maybe some issues in how you're communicating, if you have some conflict, then at least you have that standard resource where people agree to what the definitions are for some of these key terms in the area that you're trying to support. All right, before we close this lesson, let's discuss how we can apply some of these concepts in a practical way. Well, I would challenge you to think of at least 20 different terms or things that need to be defined in your organization and write those down, write definitions for each of those. And as you do, be sure to include all forms of the acronyms that may be used to describe different metrics or in different departments or common phrases that are used as part of your industry. There's lots of opportunities that organizations have where they use
different terms and take them for granted. So be sure to identify all those and write down at least 20 of them to define them. And then for any metrics that are used, be sure to clearly define the equation that's used for calculating those measurements, or the sources of data that might be used in order to calculate those metrics. That could be very critical. And I recommend that you review those with other people within your organization just to see if they have differences in how they'd interpret some of those terms. You might be surprised at what you find out.
Well, that wraps up this lesson. Check out StatStuff.com for many more resources that can help you achieve powerful results. I'm Matt Hansen. Thanks for watching.